in this section, we will add the functionality to visually mark an image as favorite when clicking on the corresponding favorite icon next to our image on our site. Pretty much what we're going to need to do is swap the favorite icon that we have in our image folder from, well, it's going to start as just the favorite PNG, which is the off. And so we'll be swapping to the favorite on and vice versa. So we're going to do this using jQuery and doing it by a click event. So first, we're going to want to set up in our header partial file, we're going to want to include the latest jQuery library. So to find what that is, we're going to want to go to jQuery.com/download. From here, you're going to want to get the CDN for jQuery, the Content Delivery Networks. So if we scroll down, we'll see the option of CDNs. And for this course, on this tutorial specifically, we're going to use the Google CDN. So going here, it should link you here, and we're going to be using this snippet here for this assignment. It's the, I believe, the version 3.5.1. So if we grab that, we can go back and we can insert it, surrounded by the script tags, to import our jQuery. Then we're going to want to go to our results partial file, and we're going to add a class for the image. We're going to want that. We're just going to set that class to favorite icon because it is our favorite icon, and this is what will connect it to the JavaScript to switch the image. So now we are going to create a functions.js file in our JS folder inside of public. If we go into here, we're going to have it under the document ready so that once the page loads, this code is ran so that the event is ready to handle our when we click on the favorite icon. We're using this keyword within the click events to refer to the favorite icon we're clicking on so that it knows specifically which one we're actually clicking on. And so here we'll actually set up the event. We'll use our class with the period to identify that we're looking for a class titled favorite icon, and we'll do on the click of that object. Then inside we're going to be checking that if the source attribute is currently set to the favorite off or just the favorite PNG, then we'll switch it to the favorite on PNG. If it wasn't on the favorite PNG, then we know it was obviously on favorite on, so then we'll switch it back to the regular favorite PNG. Then we're just going to need to go back to our header file, and we're going to want to add the functions.js file that we're using. So just in between script tags as well. Now we're just going to want to make sure the app is running, and we'll go ahead and do a search for cars. And if I go ahead and try and select the middle favorite icon here, it will turn red. And if we go ahead and click it once more, it will turn back to the see-through heart. Continuing to number 9, we're going to write an API call to update favorites. So as of now, we are able to visibly mark each image as favorite when clicking on a favorite icon. However, for the user to be able to see the list of favorite images later on, we need to store the URLs of the images marked as favorites. An alternative could be using local storage, which would require plain browser-side JavaScript. However, a big limitation is the storage scope. The information is stored in a specific browser on a specific computer. The user wouldn't be able to access the list of favorite images from another computer or even other browsers on the same computer. For this reason, we'll store the URLs in a database. Given that we need to store the image URL on the database, when clicking on its corresponding favorite icon without refreshing the page, we need to implement an HTTP request via JavaScript. We'll do it using jQuery Ajax, but there are several other methods such as JavaScript fetch. Regardless of the method used, there are two things needed when writing an HTTP request. First, the API call. It runs in the browser, so it should be part of the JavaScript code, embedded within a web page. It must include the API URL and the list of parameters needed by it. The second thing is the actual API. It runs on a web server and returns data in JSON or XML format. The data can be in different formats, but those two are the most common ones. In this section, we'll write the API call, and later on, we'll write the API code. It's important to remember we use the request method within a Node program to get data from an API, the server side. However, we use jQuery Ajax or JavaScript fetch within a web page to get data from API without refreshing the page on the client side. First, we're going to want to modify something in the functions.js file to get the keyword used to search for the images and the URL of the image displayed next to the favorite icon clicked on. So going to our functions.js file, we're going to want to go ahead and start with adding these three lines and storage of the parameters we need. In the first one here, we're setting the query string to window.location.search. This is used to get the query string from the current URL, which will be something like $keyword equals and whatever you searched for. In my case, cars was the most recent thing I searched for. Then we're going to be setting URL params with this new URL search params with the query string as a parameter. This is to help us parsing each of the parameters in a URL. For some reason, Cloud9 gives us a warning in this line, but you can just ignore this. Going down a little more to where we're setting image URL, this we're using a jQuery traversing method to access the URL of the unslashed image. If we look back at our HTML code generated by the search route, you'll notice that the output is similar to the screenshots that are in the documentation of this assignment right here. When the user clicks on the third favorite icon, which is using this keyword right here, it goes to the previous, which maps it to the image right above. So it's actually grabbing the image that's loaded next to the favorite icon. So continuing down, we are calling the update favorites, or just update favorite function, which we'll write next. We're passing up to 3 arguments. The first one will help us to identify whether we need to add the URL to the database or delete it. The second one is the image URL that needs to be stored. The third one is the keyword used to search for the image, which won't be needed when we're going to be deleting. So if we scroll down, I already added the update favorite function. It's going to be receiving 3 parameters: the action, which is whether it's going to add or delete, the image URL, and the keyword. This function includes the Ajax call to the API, which will interact with the database, which we'll be writing later. So you can see we have our get method, we have our API URL, or just our URL to our function, and our 3 data parameters. And I believe I missed an S here. Moving on to step 11, we're going to write an API to store the URLs in the database. So previously we have already written the API call in the functions JavaScript file using jQuery and Ajax, which we see right in front of us now. We used /API/update favorites as the URL to the API, and we are passing 3 parameters: the action, the image URL, and the keyword. In this section, we'll write the /API/update favorites route to interact with the database and to store the image URL and the keyword when the value of action is add, and delete it from the database if its value is delete. Since we'll be interacting with the MySQL database, you'll need the information to create the connection, being the host name, the username, password, and database name. So we're going to want to start by creating this dbpool.js file in the root of our lab 5 project. So right inside our lab 5, we're going to want to do a new file, and you'll want to name it dbpool.js. Inside of there, you're going to want to copy this general code into here. Observe that we start by embedding the MySQL package, which we installed towards the beginning of this assignment. In line 3, we're creating a pool of connections, which is a best practice when connecting to a database. The connection limit is set to 10 because the free version of the JAWS DB database in Heroku allows up to 10 connections. We're going to want to make sure to go ahead and replace the values for host, user, password, and database with our actual values of our database. And then in line 11 here, we're going to use module exports to be able to import it from our app.js file. So I'm going to go ahead and make these changes now. Okay, so you see that I went ahead and replaced my host. I just did the actual IP address with the port. I'm not exactly sure if I might just need to replace this with just localhost. I know sometimes they like it more when you actually put in the IP address with the port, but so this may just be able to be interchangeable with localhost. Either way, whichever works is fine. My user for mine is root, which if I open up MySQL again, right here for my connection, you'll see that the user shows as root. And at least in my experience with MySQL Workbench, when I've tried to set up an admin user at the start, it doesn't automatically assign in a password. So I'm actually commenting out the password because I anticipate that it's not going to want me entering one. It may also work to have the password field just with a blank string. But from what I've had to do in the past, I'm just going to remove the password parameter completely. And then finally, we'll just set our database to CST336, which was what I had set the database right here as. Now we're going to want to go back to our app.js file, and we're going to want to include the new dbpool.js file, just like we have done prior with the other packages. It's important to note the period / syntax as part of the path. This is needed because it's a local file, so we're letting it know that we are in the root of our project. So next in the app.js file, we're going to add the API/update favorites route right below our last route that we did, which was the search route. So I already just copied this in from the assignment's documentation. But this route will be executed when clicking on any of the favorite icons, and it receives 3 parameters, which we've gone over: the action, which could be add or delete, the image URL, and the keyword. So in line 32, we are including a switch statement using the value of the action parameter. Given that the method used in the Ajax call written in function.js is get, we use the query property of the request to get the values of the parameters. Within the switch statement, we write the corresponding SQL statements to either add or delete, which is, in this case, insert and delete. So to either add or delete the record. Notice that the SQL statements is using question marks as placeholders, and then the actual values are entered using an array in the following lines. This is done to prevent SQL injection, which is malicious code that would affect the database. In line 40, continuing on, we're using the pool constant that refers to the database pool that we created within the dbpool.js file. We're executing the SQL statement using pool.query, passing the corresponding parameters to the database. Pool.query returns 3 parameters, ERR for error, rows, and fields. Error will only have a value assigned if there's any error interacting with the database. Rows will have a different value depending on the SQL statement executed. For a select statement, it will include all rows selected. For any other SQL statement, it will include information about the SQL transaction, such as the number of rows affected. The fields will only have a value when executing a select statement. It will include all data about each field retrieved, such as data type and length. Continuing on in line 42, we're displaying the value of rows just for debugging purposes. In line 43, we're sending back to the browser the number of affected rows. Notice that we are using res.send instead of, I'll just say response.render, because the web page should not be refreshed. If a record was properly added or deleted, the value of affected rows should be 1. If its value is 0, it means that the record was not added or deleted. Okay, so now we want to test the API directly. There are several ways in which you can test the API, but one of the fastest ways is by previewing the running application like we've been doing, and then typing directly the route that we have here, API update favorites, and then also passing in the parameters in the browser's address bar. So if we go ahead and do that, I already did it here, but I'll refresh one more time. We have the image URL just set to ABC, the keyword set to XYZ, and the action set to add. So if I go ahead and refresh, we'll just get this 1 returned. And in our console, we get, since I did it twice, we get the rows returned, which was what we were logging in our code right here. So it doesn't really matter what values used for image URL and keyword. However, the value of action must be add without quotes, just like I did up here. As the browser output, you should see a 1, which is the value of the affected rows. So now let's go ahead and take a look at MySQL. I have my JAWS database right here. If we open that up, which I already had opened, but we're just reopening it. We go ahead and take a look in the tables, and we will select rows. And so I'm anticipating 2 rows being in there because I did it once prior, and then I ran it again. So here we go. We see 2 identical rows, identical in terms of the image URL and keyword, and then we have that auto-incrementing ID. So now that we've confirmed our API is working correctly, let's test our AJAX call. So we're going to want to run our app just in a separate tab here. And we're going to want to search for a keyword. So I'll go ahead and do car. So before we actually click on any of the favorites buttons, we'll just leave it here for now. We're going to want to do F12 to inspect the page. And I'll try and pull this up just here on the side. And so from here, we're just going to want to go to the network tab. And we're going to want to clear out any previous output. So this, I guess, crossed out circle is the clear button. So we'll go ahead and click that. Now, keeping this tab open, I'm going to move it to the side really quick, and I'll move it back over. And so we'll go back to the browser, and we're going to go ahead and favorite one of these pictures. So I'll favorite this one here. So now if we see our network tab, you should be able to see the URL to the API along with the parameters passed and the value returned by the API, which should be 1. So we do see the URL sent here. The content length is 1. There's a lot of different information here, as well as the image that was returned. So I believe if I select the URL here and go to preview, we'll see the one that should be returned. So now we'll check the database once more, and we should be able to see a new record with the corresponding values for image, URL, and keyword. So if I pull this back up, I need to refresh this, so I'm going to select rows again. And we now will see our image URL with the URL properly and the keyword that we used to search. Going back to our code here, I believe in, let's see, where are we looking? In the functions file for update favorite, we do not have any code within the success block here. A more elaborated version of this app could check the value returned by the API, the affected roads, and display an error message if its value is not 1, informing the user that the image was not added or deleted to or from the database. But for the scope of this project, we don't need to worry about that as of now.